What does it sound like when the world's most powerful voice can't find words to say, "I'm hurting," to the one person who matters most? Freddie Mercury knew. November 1985, standing in a hospital parking lot in East London, holding a phone with hands shaking so badly he could barely keep the receiver steady, trying to say something, anything meaningful to his father, and managing only 30 seconds of polite emptiness before hanging up. That phone call happened on a Tuesday afternoon. By Friday night, Freddie Mercury would walk off one of the biggest stages in England in the middle of a performance, leaving 70,000 people in stunned silence. And between those two moments, he would sit across from Sir Alistair Thorne, one of British television's most respected interviewers, and strip away every layer of the persona he'd spent 20 years building, revealing something so raw and honest that Thorne would make a decision that night that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He would lock the tape in a vault and promise Freddie Mercury it would never be broadcast. This is the story of what Freddie said in that interview, why he said it, and what happened when the mask he'd worn since childhood finally cracked in front of millions of people who thought they knew exactly who he was. November 1985, Garden Lodge, Kensington, London. A cold evening with that particular quality of British autumn where the air feels damp even indoors and darkness comes too early. Freddie Mercury stood at the window of his home, looking out at the garden but not really seeing it. In his mind, he was seeing something else entirely. The harbor in Zanzibar, where he'd grown up, the smell of salt water and spices, the sound of his father's voice calling him home as the sun set over the Indian Ocean. The phone rang. Jim Beach, Queen's manager, answered it and then held it out to Freddie with an expression that suggested this call mattered. The producer of the Alistair Thorne show was on the line. Sir Alistair Thorne wanted Freddie on his program. But there was a condition. This wouldn't be a typical rock star interview with prepared anecdotes and promotional talking points. Thorne wanted something real, something honest. He wanted Freddie Mercury to actually talk about who he was beneath the costumes and the stagecraft. Freddie took the phone, listened, and then said something that made Jim Beach nervous. "I think it's time, don't you?" Beach would later admit he had no idea what Freddie meant by that, but he recognized the tone. It was the voice Freddie used when he'd made a decision that couldn't be unmade. 2 days before that phone call, something had arrived at Garden Lodge that changed everything. A letter, not the usual fan mail that arrived in bags and boxes, but something that had traveled much farther and carried much more weight. The envelope was worn and wrinkled, covered with stamps from Tanzania. Inside was a letter from someone named Rashid Khan, a name from Freddie's childhood in Zanzibar that he hadn't heard in decades. Rashid had been Freddie's closest friend during those years before the family moved to England. They'd run through narrow streets together, shared secrets, whispered the first songs Freddie ever wrote, hiding them from his father, who believed music was a distraction from serious pursuits. The letter was brief. Rashid was in London. He was sick, very sick. He was in a hospital in Whitechapel and didn't have much time. He wanted to see his old friend one more time. Not Freddie Mercury, the rock star. Farrokh Bulsara, the boy who used to sing in the harbor when no one was listening. Freddie read the letter 3 times, then put it in his pocket and didn't tell anyone about it. The next morning, Freddie didn't follow his usual routine, didn't spend hours choosing an outfit or applying makeup or preparing for the world to see him. He put on a simple jacket, walked out to the street, and hailed a taxi like any ordinary person. The driver didn't recognize him. That never happened. But without the theatrical presentation, without the carefully constructed image, Freddie Mercury became invisible. Just another man in London, Whitechapel Hospital, room 307, a small space that smelled of disinfectant and illness. Rashid lay in the bed, thinner than Freddie remembered, but with the same eyes. Those eyes that had seen Farrokh before Freddie existed. "You came," Rashid said, his voice weak but genuinely surprised. "Of course I came," Freddie replied, and for the first time in years, his accent shifted slightly. Not the polished British pronunciation he'd perfected, but something older, something from Zanzibar. They talked for an hour about the harbor, about the songs they'd made up, about Farrokh's father, who had very specific ideas about what his son should become, and music was not part of that plan. "Do you remember the harbor song?" Rashid asked. Eyes closing with exhaustion. The one we sang behind your father's back? Freddie remembered. A simple melody about ships leaving port and never returning. About boys who wanted to sail away and never did. They'd sung it in whispers, always watching for Farouk's father, always afraid of being caught doing something frivolous. Sitting in that hospital room, Freddie realized something that made his chest tighten. Every stadium he'd ever filled was just another version of that harbor. Every performance was still him singing behind his father's back. Still the boy looking for permission that never came. Rashid died 3 days later. But that afternoon in room 307 broke something open in Freddie that couldn't be closed again. When Freddie left the hospital, he went to the parking lot and stood there for 10 minutes, not moving. Other people came and went around him. Cars drove past. Life continued with complete indifference to the fact that Freddie Mercury had just watched a piece of his childhood die in a sterile room. He pulled out a cigarette. His hands shook so badly he needed 3 attempts to light it. Then he did something he almost never did. He found a payphone and dialed a number he knew by heart but rarely called. His father's number. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Freddie almost hung up. Then his father answered. "Hello? Baba?" Freddie said, using the word he hadn't spoken in years. "It's me." Freddie, his father's voice was neutral, not warm, not cold, just factual. "Is something wrong?" "No," Freddie said quickly. I wanted to hear your voice." Silence on the other end. In the background, Freddie could hear a television playing. His father was watching something. Had been interrupted. "I'm fine, Baba," Freddie continued, trying to fill the silence. "Everything is good. What could he say? That he'd just watched a childhood friend die? That he'd spent the last hour remembering who he used to be before he became who the world wanted? That he was calling because he suddenly desperately needed his father to say something, anything that sounded like approval or understanding or love? "That's good," his father said. "I'm glad you're well." "Are you well?" Freddie asked. "Yes, fine." Another silence. Freddie could feel the distance between them like a physical thing. 40 years of distance compressed into a phone line. His father on one end, living a quiet, respectable life. Freddie on the other, living the opposite of everything his father had wanted for him. "Okay then," his father said. "Was there something you needed?" "No," Freddie replied, voice barely above a whisper. "Nothing, I just wanted to call." "All right, take care of yourself." "You too, Baba." The line clicked off. The entire conversation had lasted 30 seconds, maybe less. Freddie stood in that parking lot holding a dead phone, and for the first time in his adult life, he cried in public. Not theatrical tears for a performance. Real tears that he couldn't control or package into something artistic. He had the world's most powerful voice. Could command stadiums. Could make millions of people feel every emotion he wanted them to feel. But he couldn't make his father say "I love you," or "I'm proud of you," or even "tell me what's wrong." 30 seconds. That's all he got. 30 seconds of polite distance. And it broke something in him that had been cracking for years. 3 days later, Freddie Mercury sat across from Sir Alistair Thorne in a television studio in central London. The audience was small, maybe 50 people. The set was elegant but simple. 2 chairs, a small table, sophisticated lighting that made everything look warm and intimate. Thorne was known for his thoughtful interviews. He didn't ambush guests or go for sensational moments. He asked real questions and listened to real answers. British television at its best: intelligent, respectful, genuinely interested in understanding rather than exploiting. The interview started normally enough. Questions about Queen's recent tour, about the new album they were working on, about Freddie's songwriting process. Freddie gave good answers, professional, charming, the Freddie Mercury everyone expected. But Thorne was watching carefully, and he saw something in Freddie's eyes that didn't match the practiced responses. Something heavy, something hurting. So Thorne did something he rarely did. He abandoned his prepared questions and went off script. "Freddie," he said, leaning forward slightly, "when you're on stage performing for thousands of people, who are you actually singing to?" The studio went quiet. The audience stopped shifting in their seats. Even the camera operators seemed to hold still. Freddie could have deflected. could have given a charming non-answer, could have said, "Everyone, darling," with that theatrical flair and moved on. Instead, his shoulders dropped. The performance face slipped. And for the first time in the interview, the person sitting across from Thorne wasn't Freddie Mercury. It was someone else entirely. "My father," Freddie said quietly. "I'm always singing to my father." Thorne didn't interrupt, didn't fill the silence, just waited. And Freddie kept talking. He talked about Zanzibar, about being a boy named Farouk who loved music but had a father who thought music was a waste of time, about moving to England and slowly transforming into someone his father might never understand, about building Freddie Mercury as a defense against being Farouk because Farouk had been rejected. But maybe Freddie Mercury could be accepted. He talked about Rashid, about the hospital room, about realizing that he'd spent 20 years filling stadiums with people, and it still didn't replace the one person he actually wanted to reach. "3 days ago," Freddie said, voice dropping to almost a whisper, "I called my father. Do you know how long we talked? 30 seconds. That's all. 30 seconds of 'How are you? Fine. Goodbye.' And I realized I have the biggest voice in rock and roll, but I can't make my father hear me." Someone in the audience started crying, quietly but audibly. Thorne's face showed something camera operators later said they had never seen from him. He was tearing up too. "Why do you think that is?" Thorne asked gently. Freddie looked at him, really looked at him, and said, "Because I've spent my whole life trying to be impressive enough to deserve his attention. But the person he might actually want to know, Farouk, I buried that person so deep I don't know if he exists anymore." The weight of that statement hung in the air. Freddie's voice had cracked slightly on the word buried. Not a performance crack, a real one. The kind that comes when truth forces its way out, whether you are ready or not. Thorne made a decision in that moment. He stood up, walked over to Freddie, and did something completely unprecedented for British television. He took Freddie's hand. "Thank you for trusting me with this," Thorne said. "I promise you this tape will never air. This was for you, not for them." Freddie looked up at him, confused. "What?" "Some things are too important to be entertainment," Thorne said. "This stays between us." The studio audience didn't know what to do. This wasn't how television worked. But Thorne was serious. He signaled to the crew to stop recording, had the tape removed and locked in his personal safe that night. That evening, Queen had a performance at Wembley Arena, 70,000 tickets sold. The show had been sold out for months. Freddie showed up, got into costume, went through makeup, did all the usual preparations. But something was different. Jim Beach noticed it. Brian May noticed it. Everyone noticed it, but nobody said anything. The show started normally. The crowd roared. The lights blazed. Queen launched into their set with the precision and power they were famous for. But when they reached Somebody to Love, something happened. Freddie was singing the line about needing somebody to love. His voice, which had been perfect all night, suddenly cracked. Not dramatically, just a slight break. A moment where the technical perfection slipped and something raw came through. In that crack, everyone in the arena heard it. Pain, real pain. Not performed, not theatrical, just human suffering leaking through the performance. Freddie stopped singing mid-line, put the microphone down, and walked off stage. The band kept playing for a few bars, confused, then stopped. The crowd went silent, 70,000 people holding their breath. Backstage, Brian May found Freddie sitting on a road case, head in his hands. "I can't do this today," Freddie said. "Today I'm not Freddie Mercury. Today I'm Farouk, and Farouk can't carry this." Brian sat down beside him. Didn't try to talk him into going back. Just sat there. After 5 minutes, Freddie stood up. "I need to do something different," he said. He walked back onto stage. The crowd erupted when they saw him, but Freddie held up his hand for quiet. "I'm going to sing you something different tonight," he said into the microphone. His voice was small, not the commanding presence they were used to, just a man talking. And then he sang the harbor song, the simple melody from Zanzibar that he and Rashid used to sing. No backing band, no elaborate production, just his voice and a piano and a song about ships leaving port and never coming home. It was the most honest performance of his career, and the most heartbreaking. Sir Alistair Thorne kept his promise. The tape of that interview stayed locked in his personal safe until his death in 2005. In his will, he left instructions that it be given to Freddie Mercury's family with a note attached. The note said simply, "This was the truth. He trusted me with it. I kept it safe." Freddie's family watched it once, then locked it away again. Some truths are too precious to share. Some moments of vulnerability should remain protected. But the story leaked anyway, as stories do. People who were in the studio audience that day told their versions. Crew members who saw what happened spoke to journalists years later. Thorne himself, in his final interview before he died, confirmed the interview existed and that he'd kept it from airing deliberately. The question that remains is this: why did Freddie Mercury break down that day? Why November 1985? The answer is simple and complicated. Rashid dying reminded him of who he used to be. The phone call with his father reminded him of the distance he'd created. And Thorne asking, "Who are you singing to?" made him say out loud what he'd been avoiding for 20 years. He was still the boy in Zanzibar singing behind his father's bum, hoping to be heard, never quite feeling like he was. Success hadn't fixed that. Fame hadn't healed it. Being Freddie Mercury hadn't made Farouk Bulsara feel acceptable to the one person whose acceptance he wanted most. 30 seconds. That's all he got from his father. And it wasn't enough. Freddie Mercury died in 1991. His father, Bomi Bulsara, attended the funeral. People who were there said he cried, said he stood over his son's casket, and finally said the things he'd never said while Freddie was alive. But Freddie didn't hear them. The 30 seconds had been his chance, and it had been filled with "How are you? Fine, goodbye." The lock tape remains locked. Maybe that's appropriate. Maybe some moments of truth are meant to be preserved exactly as they were: vulnerable, unpolished, real, not turned into content or entertainment or lessons. Freddie Mercury spent his life performing, being spectacular, giving millions of people exactly what they wanted. But in that hospital parking lot, holding a phone, getting 30 seconds with his father, he was just a son who wanted his father to ask, "What's wrong?" and mean it. That's not a story about a rock star. That's a story about being human, about the distance between who we are and who we needed someone to see, about how success doesn't heal childhood wounds, about how you can fill stadiums and still feel completely unheard by the one person who matters. The tape exists somewhere, locked away, protected, and maybe that's exactly where it should stay. But the 30-second phone call, that happened. And anyone who's ever tried to connect with someone who won't quite let them in knows exactly how Freddie felt standing in that parking lot.